But for people not familiar, basically as soon as the season is done in college hoops, this past year it was obviously Baylor over Gonzaga. A lot of writers, myself included, we go out and put out our way too early top 25, looking ahead to who we think is going to be really good next year. The thing is, though, that in college basketball, maybe more than any other sport, rosters change, and maybe this offseason more than ever, rosters have changed because of the craziness of the transfer portal. And so what I wanted to do, I haven't done an official update of my top 25 since the season ended. Now, I did put out a top 10 a few weeks ago, but it's worth noting a bunch of teams have added players since then, most notably Kentucky adding 2 guys, Arkansas added a guy. So what I want to do is go ahead and update my way too early top 25. And what I would say before I get started is this, is that we have to remember there are still some big NBA decisions to come. And so because of it, some of these teams will still change over the course of the next couple weeks. What I had to do is basically take the information that I have and make educated guesses on who is coming back, who is not coming back. And then look, if a Johnny Juzang, if an Isaiah Jackson, if a Keon Brooks decide to return, decide to go pro, I will adjust things accordingly. But again, here is my too early top 25 that really isn't too early anymore because transfer portal season is done. Let's get into it. The number 1 team in my too early top 25, post-transfer portal, late spring, going into Memorial Day weekend, I actually think it's pretty much a no-brainer. That is the UCLA Bruins. And it's interesting because when I did kind of the sort of updated top 10 a few weeks ago, I had UCLA number 1. But here's the catch with UCLA. So they make the Final Four last year, and I think a lot of people are sitting there saying, well, if they hadn't made the Final Four, Torres, there's no way that you're putting them at number 1. And, to a degree, you're probably right. But on the flip side, it is worth noting that at UCLA, they were the preseason Pac-12 favorites last year. They started 12-2, and then, boom, Chris Smith, who was on paper their best player, goes down with an injury. Takes them a few weeks to figure things out. They struggled down the stretch. Every team they lost to was really good. USC, Oregon, Oregon State. And so I don't believe that UCLA was this incredible, plucky underdog that made the Final Four and almost beat Gonzaga. I think it's the opposite. I think they were probably at full strength, about one of the top 10 to 15 teams in the country all season long, got cold when they lost some players to injury, then got hot when it mattered most in the NCAA tournament. And so to me, they are, I don't even think it's a debate, the number 1 team in the country, and it's for a very simple reason. They could literally return every single player off last year's Final Four team. The obvious big name is Johnny Juzang. He was incredible in the NCAA tournament, and I'll be honest, I thought as soon as that tournament was done, Johnny Juzang had played his last college game. And look, there's still a chance that he goes pro, but every single day that he remains on campus, every single day that UCLA, which is in this weird quarter system, they don't have semesters at UCLA, they have quarters. Every single day that he is still on campus taking classes is another chance that he is potentially going to stay at UCLA. And so as of right now, I actually feel like it's maybe 50-50 that he returns, whereas, 3 days after the NCAA tournament, I thought it was like 10-90 in terms of staying going. But here's the crazy part. I just mentioned a minute ago that Johnny Juzang wasn't even playing well early, and UCLA's best player early was a kid named Chris Smith. He goes down with an injury in the middle of January. Now here's the crazy part. He was a senior. Because of the extra year of eligibility, he now might come back too. UCLA actually posted a video this week of him working out at the facility, and it's like, if they get those 2 guys back, those are going to be 2 of the best players in the Pac-12. On top of that, I want to give Mick Cronin a little bit of credit. In this transfer portal world that we live in where everybody's leaving and everybody's looking for a bigger role, it's kind of incredible. UCLA is one of only 3 programs, as far as I know, at the Power 5, Power 6 level that has not lost a single player to the transfer portal, and they have nobody leaving. It's incredible to me. They have their role players want to come back, want to be part of what UCLA was last year, want to continue to build on it. And on top of that, never forget, UCLA also has a 5-star, one-and-done type kid, Peyton Watson, coming in to UCLA next year. On top of that, Miles Johnson, a starter on Rutgers' NCAA tournament team, has transferred in. And so when I look at UCLA's roster, I'm telling you right now, if Johnny Juzang and Chris Smith come back, they may legitimately have 13 guys, all 13 scholarships on not only filled, but with guys that can play. That actually may be too much talent, but it's a good problem to have. If Johnny Juzang comes back, I don't even think it's a debate. UCLA should be the number 1 team in the country. Number 2 is Gonzaga. And Gonzaga was my number 1 immediately after the season. And it's interesting, right? Like, I felt a little bit guilty putting Gonzaga number 1 a day after they got destroyed by Baylor in the national championship game. But when you take a deep breath and you look at who they have coming back, you look at who they're bringing in, they should be towards the top. First of all, as I record here late Wednesday, it became official. Drew Timme, Final Four, just star against UCLA. Drew Timme's coming back. This is the kid, the big kid with the mustache, but he's a baller. He's coming back. Andrew Nembhard is coming back. And since the season ended, they have added 3 5-star freshmen. Chet Holmgren is the most notable one. He's the number 1 high school player in America. Big, tall, lanky kid, but tough defense, shot blocking, and he can step out and hit threes. And I actually like the inside-outside kind of combination of him and Drew Timme together. On top of that, Hunter Salas, a 5-star guard, and Nolan Hickman, who was committed to play at Kentucky, is now staying in the Pacific Northwest and going to Gonzaga. On top of that, they add a transfer named Rasir Bolton, who averaged 15 points in the Big 12 last year against Iowa State. And 2 top former 100 recruits, Dominic Harris and Julian Strother, were on the bench last year and are going to develop. And so, if anything, Gonzaga to me almost has a UCLA thing of this was a team that basically played 6 or 7 guys last year. Do they have too many guys? And then what I would also say is really interesting is we kind of think of Gonzaga as this developmental guys redshirt, they stay an extra year kind of program. How do they handle having 3 5-star freshmen that are all going to come in and expect to play? We know it's a new world. I think that's an interesting challenge for Mark Few, but it's worth noting it's a good problem to have, having 3 5-stars, and so I have Gonzaga at number 2. Number 3 is Villanova, and here's an interesting thing about Villanova. So when I did my way too early top 25 a few months ago, immediately after the season, the one thing I did not do is speculate on which seniors were going to take their extra year of eligibility. Remember, every senior gets an extra year because of COVID, but I didn't try to speculate in that first edition of the too early top 25 on who was going to come back. I just felt like, look, these kids are 23, 24, 22. It's impossible to figure out who's going to stay and who's going to go. I bring that up because Villanova has probably been the single biggest winner in terms of a team that had seniors elect to use their extra year. 2 starters, Colin Gillespie, Jermaine Samuels, both are coming back for a 5th season. They're both using that extra year. And it's worth noting that before Colin Gillespie got hurt last year, Villanova was basically in the top 5 all season long. So they do lose one good player, Jeremiah Robinson Earl, down low. He was their best low post player. And I do think they got to figure things out in terms of how, what are they going to do down low. But Villanova basically bringing back 8 of their top 9 off a team that was in the top 5 for most of the season. I have them at number 3. At number 4, how about our boy Bill Self? I mean, say what you want about Bill Self, but every time that you think he is going to go into a season shorthanded, he always pulls a rabbit out of his hat. And how it happens and why it happens, we're going to stay out of that. But I bring it up because this was a team that they looked good. I think in my first iteration, I had them in maybe a fringe top 10 team. But the one thing they were lacking was a point guard. Well, funny thing happens. They are waiting on a point guard. What are they going to do? Who are they going to sign? Are they going to have a point guard? Remy Martin, Arizona State, 2-time All-Pac-12 first team, enters the portal, commits to Kansas. He is a high-volume shooter, scorer, but I believe playing for Bill Self, I think he's going to have his best season. And you look at who is around him, Kansas should be really good. If everything goes to plan, Kansas should only lose one player off last year's team. That's Marcus Garrett, who was their point guard. He's replaced by Remy Martin. They have 2 players testing the waters right now for the NBA draft, Ochai Agbaji and Jalen Wilson. If both those guys come back, basically Kansas's entire team returns intact from last year with an upgraded point guard. What I think is especially interesting about Kansas, we have to remember, we all talked about, it's a down year. They're not very good. They're not this. They're not that. They finished second in the Big 12 standings last year. It's crazy. We thought they were done. We thought they were cooked. They were overrated. They finished second in the Big 12 and ended up with the number 3 seed. So that whole team with an upgraded point guard is back. And so I have Kansas at number 4 in my too early top 25. Number 5 is Ohio State. And Ohio State, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on because nothing's really changed for them. They exited the season essentially returning most of a team that spent most of last season in the top 10. If you remember, they were a number 2 seed. They get bounced by Oral Roberts. That kid Max Abmas was unbelievable. Oral Roberts almost went to the Elite 8. They lost to Arkansas in the Sweet 16. But Ohio State basically returns their whole team intact. And I think these next 2 teams, Ohio State and the one I'm going to get to in a minute, it's always a push-pull because I don't think Ohio State has elite top-of-the-end talent. And I think there are teams below them that I'm going to get to in a minute that I do think at the end of the day could eventually surpass them. But you got to remember, this is a preseason poll, and I think Ohio State's going to be pretty good from day one, even if the upside isn't there. So I have Ohio State at number 5, followed by, at number 6, Purdue. And it's the exact same thing. Purdue finished 4th in the Big Ten last year. If you remember, we thought the Big Ten was amazing. Illinois, Michigan, Ohio State, whoever. Purdue actually was one of the hottest teams in the country down the stretch. They return everybody from last year, add 2 top 50 prospects, and I just think they're going to be really good. Now, is their upside in March going to be as high as some other teams? I don't know, but I also think there's something to be said that all of these other teams, Kansas, Kentucky, Arkansas, Alabama, Texas, Baylor, whoever, all these teams, Gonzaga, are going to be breaking in all these new pieces. Purdue's just basically like, yeah, we're running it back. Let's see what we can do. So they are at number 6. Number 7, the first of 3 SEC teams in my top 25, in my top 10, in my top 10, 5 SEC teams overall in my top 25, 3 in the top 10. That is the Alabama Crimson Tide. And I think it'd be easy to sit there and look at Alabama and say they lose Herb Jones, they lose John Petty, which is true. And those were probably their 2 most marquee players. But if you actually look at the stat sheet, Alabama's top 2 scorers were Jaden Shackelford and Javon Quinterly. And both those guys are coming back. Javon Quinterly, I thought, played really well in the NCAA tournament. Shackelford is, in theory, testing the NBA draft. I assume he's coming back. They have another guard named Josh Primo testing the NBA draft. I assume he's coming back. So that is a monster 3-headed guard combination, all who played well last year on an SEC championship team. And then on top of that, Nate Oates does a great job hitting the portal every year. They add Namari Burnett, a former McDonald's All-American who began his career at Texas Tech. Noah Gurley, he's kind of a stretch 5, that Nate Oates forward that can step out and hit a 3. So I like Alabama at number 7. It's worth noting they also added a 5-star center late in the signing period with Charles Badeko, a 7-foot center from Canada. Number 8, this is a team jumping in the top 10 for the first time over these last couple weeks. It is the Kentucky Wildcats. And I'll say this. So a couple things with Kentucky. I've talked a ton about them the last couple weeks, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time here. I am not as anti-John Calipari as everybody else. And I do think, he deserves the criticism that he got last year, and he got crushed a lot. But I also believe that last year was such a byproduct of such the weird calendar. And you'll hear it with Bruce Pearl in a minute. Bruce Pearl and I talk about how weird it was having your kids on campus and not being able to work out with them. And so because of it, I bring it up because because John Calipari in Kentucky maybe hurt more than anybody by last year's weird offseason. But I also, on top of that, just the moves that he made in general. And I think when you look at this team next year with a full summer, with a new coaching staff, I think they're going to be really good. Severe Wheeler, the point guard that they brought in, I love him. 7.5 assists a game at Georgia last year. I've said it a bunch the last couple weeks. Just sound like you just listen to him in an interview. He just sounds like a grown man, the kind of kid that you would want your daughter to bring home for dinner if she's dating him. Like he just sounds like what the leader of a basketball team should look like. Kentucky's 3-point shooting stunk, so what do? C.J. Frederick, who shot 48% from 3 at Iowa, comes to Kentucky. On top of that, Kellen Grady, a 4-time All-A-10 guard, headed to Kentucky. So they upgrade the shooting, they upgrade the scoring, they upgrade the point guard. They add Ty Washington this summer, 5-star guard who's kind of a combo, can play on the ball, can play off the ball. Really like how he fits in. And then also Oscar Tshiebwe from the course of the transfer portal in January. He's been on campus. He knows this team, and I like him. And I also like the players that are coming back. The guys that you couldn't lose that are going to be role players, Dante Allen, Jacob Toppin, and Lance Ware are all back. And I will say this with Kentucky. I don't know what's going to happen with Keon Brooks, with Davion Mintz, and with Isaiah Jackson. For non-Kentucky fans, they still have 3 players testing the draft waters. I don't know what to make of it. Keon Brooks isn't even testing the draft waters. He just hasn't officially announced that he is coming back yet. But as I record, all 3 of those guys are in limbo. If you're asking me if I had to take a guess, I'm speculating, even having them at number 8, that Davion Mintz is gone, just because I just look at that situation and say, if Kentucky added 3 guards over the last couple weeks, I just don't see the scenario where they actually end up bringing Davion Mintz back for that exact reason. Because you sign 3 guards, it means that you're moving in another direction. Davion Mintz is obviously welcome back, but I don't expect him to actually be back. Keon Brooks and Isaiah Jackson, I just don't expect either. But I love what Kentucky did. I think they're really good. Cannot wait for opening night where they play my number 9 team, Duke. And so it's funny with Duke, right? Because every single year, Duke fans claim that I have their team underrated, that I'm underrating them, I'm a hater, I'm a this, I'm a that. Here's the reality. I think I have them higher than most people coming into this season. Paolo Banchero, 5-star forward from Seattle. I believe he is the most college-ready freshman entering college basketball this coming season. I think he's going to be a star day one. On top of that, A.J. Griffin, a 5-star wing. It's interesting. I read a story that his high school season was canceled, and so his dad is an assistant coach with the Toronto Raptors. And I had read that he actually spent part of the season working out with the Toronto Raptors. So you talk about getting ready. On top of that, another 5-star Trevor Keels. But maybe most importantly, Duke has some good players coming back. Jeremy Roach, a point guard, I thought played really well late in the season. Mark Williams, a 7-foot center. And then finally, on top of that, Wendell Moore, a wing, former top 30 recruit. At some point, the kid is going to break out. When he does, I really do think that Duke is going to be a problem. And as I said, they opening night against Kentucky. Also, they play Gonzaga on Thanksgiving weekend in Vegas. That's a game I'm going to try to get to. Finally, number 10, and I'm not going to go through all top 25 teams. I'll stop at 10 and then go quickly through the rest, is number 10 is Arkansas. And here's the thing about Arkansas. We all know about Eric Musselman. If you don't know, you don't listen to this podcast because he's been on a bunch. Great guy. Love talking ball with him. But he's always going to upgrade the roster in the offseason. He was one of the early adapters to the transfer portal. But what's interesting about Arkansas right now is they have 4 or 5 guys coming back off last year's Elite 8 team. That's a lot of returnees for a Eric Musselman coach team. It's always subject to change, but as of right now, Devo Davis, who basically hit one of the biggest shots in school history to send them to the Elite 8, he's coming back. Jalen Williams, who I thought was one of the better big men in the SEC late in the year, kind of a do-it-all role player, whatever you need, get your fingernails dirty kind of guy, he is back. J.D. Note, who was balling out against Baylor before he fouled out in the Elite 8, he's coming back. And oh, by the way, there's a kid named K.K. Robinson, who's a former top 50 prospect, who was injured last year, who is coming to play this year. On top of that with Arkansas, and this is the part that's worth noting, they still hit the transfer portal hard, even with all the guys they got. I've talked about it before, but Chris Likes, 15 points per game at Miami. Audi's Tony, 15 points per game at Pitt. So you're bringing in 2 guards that averaged 15 a game in the ACC last year, and I know Chris Likes was hurt a little bit, but it doesn't matter. Stanley Amude, 20 points per game at the mid-major level. Jackson Robinson, a former top 50 recruit who kind of struggled in one year at Texas A&M. But I bring it up, and I talked about this the other day with Arkansas. I love that they not only added pieces, but they added pieces to that Eric Musselman system of having a bunch of guys that can pass, dribble, shoot, take people off the dribble, create. I love this roster. And I think there's even a possibility that when I actually look at all the pieces on paper, I could be ranking them too low at number 10, but I really do like Arkansas at number 10. This is what I'm going to do. First of all, before we continue, there are 3 new teams from the original top 25 that I did a couple months back. Okay, 3 teams that weren't in there at all. The first one is Texas. Probably shouldn't be surprised. Chris Beard becomes the head coach. They crush it in the transfer portal, and Texas is now at number 12, in my way too early top 25 post-transfer portal. It's because they've added 4 marquee transfers, okay? Timmy Allen, an all Pac-12 guard from Utah. On top of him, Christian Bishop, a starter down low for Creighton last year in their Sweet 16 team. Dylan Dissu, who averaged 15 and 9 at Vanderbilt last year. Devin Askew, who of course got minutes at Kentucky. Also, a couple marquee players from last year's team are coming back. Courtney Ramey, Andrew Jones, Brock Cunningham. And so you look at them, and there's a lot to like. Now, they don't really have that true point guard, but I do think Andrew Jones, Devin Askew can kind of play that role. I really like Texas. They're another team at number 12 that maybe I have a little bit too low. In addition to them, in terms of being new, Oregon comes in at number 21. They were not ranked. And it's really interesting because Oregon is one of those teams that I do think that we talk about Eric Musselman in the transfer portal and maybe John Calipari over the last year or two, Chris Beard. Dana Altman is really good in the portal. He is a guy that, if you follow this stuff, always has success in the transfer portal. This year is no exception. He actually went ahead and signed 2 of the best transfers that I believe were in the portal. Davion Harmon, who averaged 13 points per game at Oklahoma last year. On top of Davion Harmon, you also have Quincy Guerriere, who was one of Syracuse's best players. He decides to enter the portal. Syracuse's leading rebounder. He's a forward. He is coming to Oregon. So those are the 3 teams that are added. Or no, 2 teams. The third team, Auburn. We're going to talk to Bruce Pearl in a minute, but they added 5 players in the portal, most notably Walker Kessler. They were unranked. I have them at number 24. I will go through the rest. Outside of the top 10, I gave you the top 10 a minute ago. It was UCLA at 1, Gonzaga 2, Villanova 3, Kansas 4, Ohio State, Purdue, Bama, Kentucky, Duke, Arkansas round out the top 10. Number 11 is Michigan. 12, I just said, is Texas. 13 is Baylor. 14 is Maryland. 15 is Houston. 16, Virginia. 17, Tennessee, who has made some nice moves this offseason. 18, UConn. 19, North Carolina with Hubert Davis, who I actually like what he has done this offseason, bringing in Brady Manick, a stretch 4. It looks like Hubert Davis is going to kind of put his own stamp on UNC, play a little bit different than Roy Williams. Number 20, Oklahoma State. They literally return everyone except for Cade Cunningham off a really good team. Isaac Likely is the name to know there. He will take over the point guard duties for Cade Cunningham, one of the best guards in the Big 12 2 years ago, was kind of banged up this year. Oregon, I just mentioned, at 21. Florida State at 22, St. Bonaventure 23, Auburn 24, as I just said, Colorado State 25. 5 teams that just missed the cut. You know, Nevada with Steve Alford was there, but Nevada actually lost a key player to the portal on Wednesday, right before I recorded, Addison Patterson. So Nevada would probably drop. Number 27, my boy Mike Woodson. Unbelievable. Got most of the roster back, added some players in the portal. I have Indiana at number 27, Michigan State number 28, LSU 29, Illinois 30, rounding out my top 30. And again,